They tell you the war in Afghanistan was fought against men with guns, against ideology, against terrain. They're lying, not by accident, by design. I'm Sergeant Daniel Harris, call sign Hawk, and what I'm about to tell you is the reason I haven't slept without a light on in 18 years. The reason I check every cave I come across in the Montana wilderness where I now spend my days. The reason 4 sets of dog tags sit in my desk drawer instead of around the necks of the men they belong to. Before we go into the Kunar Mountains, a place where the earth itself remembers things it should have forgotten, make sure you're subscribed. Because what I'm about to tell you doesn't exist in any official record. Command buried it, sealed the files, told us to carry it quietly into whatever was left of our civilian lives. Only people who want the uncensored truth belong here. Everyone else can stay in the dark with the official reports. That's where Command wants you anyway. This is the classified truth about Reaper Squad. Part 1. FOB Viper. The Pet River Valley in October 2008 was not just a combat zone. It was a psychological pressure cooker. A place that worked on you slowly, the way cold water works on stone. Not violent, patient. FOB Viper was our home. A fortress of sandbags and HESCO barriers carved into the mountainside. 32 Marines operating in rotation, running patrols along a stretch of road the Taliban treated like a personal engineering project. But calling it a home is generous. It felt less like a base and more like a cage that happened to have guns pointed outward. The local villages cooperated with nobody. Not us, not the Taliban, not God himself if he'd come down and asked politely. In a place where neutrality was the only real survival strategy, trust was a currency that had been spent a long time ago. Even in October, the cold didn't just touch you, it hollowed you out. It got into the space between your thoughts and stayed there. My 4 best men drew the assignment on October 14th. Corporal Marcus Reed, 23 years old, with a face too young for a rifle and a willingness to volunteer before you finished asking the question. He was my best rifleman, the kind of Marine who made the men around him better simply by being present. Private Jonathan Miller handled communications, a wire-thin kid from Ohio who treated every radio like it was personally his and could find a signal in a lead box with duct tape and determination. See, Lance Corporal Devin Price was the quiet professional, methodical, triple-checked everything. Already wargaming contingencies while most people were still tying their boots, Private Kyle Anderson was the opposite personality entirely. Loud, funny, permanently planning the red sports car he was going to buy when he got home. He talked about that car constantly. Together, these 4 were Reaper Squad, and on that grey October morning, they were tasked with a standard 4-man reconnaissance. 15 kilometers northeast, a mountain pass, confirmed Taliban movement between 2 valleys. 15 clicks out. 15 clicks back. Simple. The kind of mission we'd run 100 times. I helped them load their packs that morning. Checked ammo, checked water. Miller patted his radio twice the way he always did before a patrol. So Reed press-checked his M4 and grinned at me. 15 clicks there, 15 back. We'll be drinking warm rippets by 4 o'clock. I watched them walk into a fog that looked less like weather and more like a burial shroud. The mountains swallowed them whole. I should have gone with them. That thought still finds me at 3 in the morning. But Lieutenant Porter had me coordinating mortar support for another element en route Michigan, so I stood at the gate and watched 4 good men disappear and told myself it was routine. It was the last time I saw them as themselves. Part 2. The last transmission. The last confirmed contact came at 13:47 hours. Miller's voice over the radio. Calm, clear, professional. Viper Main, this is Reaper 2. Checkpoint Delta reached. No enemy contact. Moving to Rally Point Echo. Over. I was in the Tactical Operations Center when it came through. Porter marked their position on the map. Right where they were supposed to be. Right on schedule. He asked about the weather. Miller came back with a slight distortion on the signal. Fog was thick, visibility down to about 50 meters, but the ground was solid and they were making good time. That was it. That was the last transmission. Not a contact report, not a distress call. Just a routine check-in that ended in the middle of a sentence that was never finished. 15 minutes passed, then 30. By 1430, Porter was cycling through every frequency, convinced they'd accidentally switched channels. Nothing. Not static. Nothing. The specific absence of sound that experienced radio operators learn to fear because it means something is wrong at a level that frequencies can't fix. By 1500, the TOC was full of officers staring at a topographic map like the contour lines held an answer they hadn't found yet. 30 minutes later, Porter made the call. Send a search team. I was through the gate in 20 minutes with 6 Marines, 2 Humvees, and enough firepower to fight our way out of an ambush. The drive took 90 minutes through thickening fog and terrain that seemed to narrow around us the further we pushed. The mountains rose on both sides like walls being drawn together. Nobody spoke. Just diesel engines and gravel and the particular silence of men who are afraid to say out loud what they're already thinking. On part 3. The trail. We reached the last known checkpoint just as daylight began to die. The air tasted metallic the moment we dismounted. Like blood on a battery. Like the inside of something that should have been closed. Private Torres found the first sign 70 meters up the path, 4 sets of boot prints in the dust. Standard issue treads, moving in tactical formation, fresh, no more than a few hours old. Reaper squad had definitely come through here. We followed the trail into the gorge. The walls rose 200 feet on both sides. Perfect ambush terrain, except there was no ambush, no movement, no sound, not even the distant sound of birds. Just an oppressive, manufactured silence pressing down from every direction, like the mountain was holding its breath and waiting to see what we would do. See, half a kilometer in, we found Miller's radio handset lying in the center of the path. Cable still attached, no damage, no blood, just sitting in the dust like he'd set it down mid-stride and kept walking. Miller treated that radio the way some men treat their firstborn. He would not put it down voluntarily. Not for anything. 50 meters further, we found Price's M4 carbine propped carefully against a boulder. Safety on, fully loaded. Set down with deliberate care, like he'd leaned it there just for a moment and intended to come right back. I need you to understand what a Marine abandoning his weapon means. It isn't like losing your keys. It isn't even like losing something precious to you. A Marine's rifle is an extension of his training, his oath, his identity. We have a saying, you can lose anything else. You do not lose your weapon. Finding that M4 standing alone against that boulder felt like finding a severed limb still wearing its sleeve. Have you ever felt that specific dread? The kind that doesn't come from what you see, but from what should be there and isn't? Drop something in the comments right now. Tell me where you're watching from. I need to know people are out there listening to this. Then we found their tracks scattered. Breaking formation. Overlapping, confused, moving in directions that had no tactical logic. Up a slope of loose rock that offered no defensive advantage, no observation point, no reason whatsoever. 4 sets of prints heading upward into the fog, as if 4 trained combat Marines had simultaneously forgotten everything they'd ever been taught and started walking towards something only they could see. We climbed. And at the top of the ridge we found their rucksacks, all 4, lined up in a neat row like luggage outside a hotel room. Zippers closed, contents completely undisturbed. Sleeping bags, rations, ammunition, personal items, everything still inside. As if 4 men had reached some unspoken agreement to simply set down everything they were carrying and continue on lighter. That's when I saw the cave. Part 4. The Silent Gate. The entrance was maybe 6 feet high, 4 feet wide, hidden behind a cluster of boulders as if the mountain had arranged them specifically to conceal it. The boot prints led straight to it and disappeared inside. I clicked on my weapon light and went in alone. The temperature dropped the moment I crossed the threshold. At least 20 degrees colder inside, the kind of cold that doesn't feel like weather. It feels like the absence of something that should be there. The passage forced me sideways to squeeze through. My light moved across the walls and caught the carvings. Not Pashto, not Arabic, something older. Symbols cut so deep into the stone they looked less like writing and more like wounds that had never healed, carved by hands that belonged to no civilization with a name. The passage opened into a larger chamber, and in the center of the cave floor was a perfect circle of stones. each one placed with absolute deliberate care. And inside that circle, 4 sets of boot prints, facing outward. Like 4 men had stood there together in the dark, shoulder to shoulder, looking outward at nothing. And then simply ceased to exist. No bodies, no blood, no evidence of violence or struggle. So just prints in ancient dust that walked into the center of a circle and stopped, as if the stone beneath them had opened and closed and left no record of what it had taken. I have been in firefights. I have carried dying men. I have done things in the service of this country that I will answer for in whatever comes after this life. I have never experienced fear the way I experienced it in that cave, because every other fear I've known had a human face attached to it, a human cause. What I felt standing over those 4 sets of empty boot prints in the cold and the dark, that was the fear of something with no face, something that operated outside the category of human threat entirely. Hayes called me from outside. When I stepped out, he was pointing down into the valley 300 feet below. 4 figures, standing perfectly still in an open field, wearing our uniforms. I raised my rifle and brought my optic to bear. The magnification pulled them into sharp focus, and what I saw through that scope made my trigger finger stop working. They were standing in formation, backs straight, arms at their sides, faces turned upward toward us. But their faces were wrong, too smooth, too pale. Like wax poured into the shape of a face rather than a face that had lived and laughed and aged. And their eyes caught what remained of the dying daylight and reflected it back like glass, like an animal caught in a headlight beam, like something that absorbed nothing and gave everything back cold. I shouted Reed's name down into the valley. Marcus. The figures didn't react, didn't move, didn't flinch, just stood there with those terrible reflective eyes fixed upward. Then, as one, they turned and walked into the fog. Same direction, same pace, same exact moment, like a single intelligence operating 4 separate machines. We scrambled down that ridge and crossed the field in minutes. By the time we reached the spot where they'd been standing, there was nothing. No tracks, no disturbed earth, no sign that anything had stood there at all. Just empty ground and silence coming down from the mountains like weight. I keyed my radio with hands I could not keep steady and told Porter we needed to pull back immediately. That something was wrong with this place at a level I could not explain over a radio. I cut off a superior officer for the first time in my career, and I did it without hesitation because some part of me understood that whatever this was, it did not have a tactical solution. We drove back to the FOB in complete silence. What was there to say? We had gone looking for 4 Marines and come back with their gear, their weapons, and something else. A memory that none of us had words for yet. Part 5. What Command knew. When we rolled through the FOB gates, Porter was waiting with half a dozen officers I didn't recognize. Clean uniforms, no unit patches. The specific kind of anonymous that only exists on purpose. They took me to a windowless room and debriefed me for 3 hours. The same questions cycling over and over. What did you see? Describe the circle. Describe the figures. Idiot, are you certain they were your Marines and not Taliban fighters in stolen gear? I told them everything, every detail. By the end of it, they were exchanging glances I couldn't decode. Then they told me this wasn't the first time. 6 months before, a British SAS patrol had vanished in the same area. 3 months before that, an Afghan National Army squad. Same pattern every time. Gear abandoned, no bodies, no enemy engagement, nothing. And the number was growing. 19 personnel across 3 allied nations in 6 months. The official explanations had stopped making sense even to the people writing them. Then they brought in Dr. Sarah Vance, an anthropologist attached to a government agency she described in language specifically engineered to be unmemorable. So she spread photographs across the table. 17 cave systems documented throughout Kunar province, all sharing the same features. The same stone circles, the same unidentifiable symbols carved into the same ancient rock. Her term for them was threshold markers, doorways, built by a civilization that predated any written record we have access to. The local tribes had been calling them the Silent Gates for generations, oral histories passing the warning down through centuries. According to those histories, they were places of banishment. Ancient peoples drove enemies through them as punishment. Anyone who entered never returned. Porter called it folklore. The officer without a unit patch said 19 missing personnel in 6 months was not folklore. Whatever we wanted to call what was happening, it was accelerating. They wanted me to find a village elder, a man their sources said knew how to seal the gates permanently. Small team, minimal exposure. Get the elder, extract the knowledge, get out. I should have said no. I said yes. Because every time I tried to think straight, Marcus Reed's face appeared and made thinking straight impossible. If you believe there are things about history, about what has happened on this earth, that powerful institutions have spent enormous resources to keep buried like this video right now, we are just getting started. Part 6. Rahman. Our interpreter Farid had worked with us for 2 years. He knew the tribal culture of Kunar province better than most Afghans I'd encountered. On the drive out to the village, he broke a long silence to tell me something. The stories about the silent gates, he said, were not Taliban mythology. They were not Soviet-era ghost stories repurposed for a new generation of frightened soldiers. These were old stories. His grandfather's grandfather had known them, and the warning embedded in every version was always the same. Some memories belong to the mountain. Some doors exist specifically to stay closed. Some things that sleep should never be disturbed by the living. The village looked peaceful from the outside. Cooking fires. Children at a stone well. Normal. But as we approached, the children scattered without a word. Windows closed. By the time we reached the central compound, it felt like a settlement that had been abandoned an hour ago and left standing out of inertia. Then an old man stepped out of the largest structure. He leaned on a walking stick. His face was a map of every hard decade this part of the world had produced. His eyes were clouded with age and sharp as a blade at the same time. His name was Rahman. Through Farid, he told us he was the last keeper of the old knowledge. His family had held this responsibility for generations beyond counting. He told us our men were not dead, but they were not alive in any way the word alive was designed to cover. The gates did not destroy, he said. They transformed. Anyone who passed through became part of whatever waited on the other side, connected to it, absorbed into it, still present in some form that had no name in any living language. In broken English, he described what was happening to the mountains. The old ones, ancient things that existed before Islam, before any written scripture, and before any named religion, slept in the stone. The gates were the mechanism that kept them sleeping, but the gates were cracking now. Too much war. Too much blood soaking into the ground for too many years. The mountain was waking up. To seal the gates required 3 things: a stone from the first gate, blood from a keeper, and a song. Specific ancient syllables that functioned as a binding mechanism, words that worked on whatever slept below the way a key works on a lock. Before I could respond, Torres called out a warning. Movement at 3 o'clock. Figures were emerging from between the buildings, 20 of them, men, women, children, all moving in that same synchronized mechanical way, all with that same waxy pallor and reflective eyes, all tightening a slow and patient circle around us. And Jackson, our marksman, unsteadiest man I've ever served with, went completely still beside me and grabbed my arm. He pointed. Front row, 4th from the left. Kyle Anderson, still in his torn uniform. Face emptied of everything that had made him Anderson. The thing wearing Anderson's body opened its mouth. What came out was not speech. It was sound layered over sound, voices compressed into a single throat, a chord made of human voices saying, "Leave the keeper, take the gate." Rahman raised his walking stick and began chanting in a language that was neither Pashto nor Dari nor anything else I'd heard in 5 months in this country. Ancient syllables that felt physically wrong in the air, like they were pushing against something invisible. The figures stopped advancing, then began to retreat. 1 synchronized step at a time. The thing wearing Anderson tilted its head further than a human neck has any business going and smiled. A smile that split the face nearly to the ears. Then they turned and walked back into the shadows of the compounds and were gone. Rahman lowered his stick and said simply, "They test." Song still works, but not for long. Every day they grow stronger. Every night more gates open. Part 7. The Decision. Back at FOB Viper, Porter told us command was pulling the plug, reports flooding in from 3 other villages. 20 civilians missing in 48 hours. All patrols suspended as of 2200. Full defensive posture until someone further up the chain figured out what was happening. Rahman grabbed my arm with a grip that had no business belonging to a man his age. "Tonight," he said, "dark moon. The old ones at their weakest. So you wait any longer and the window closes." After that, there was no telling what the valley would look like by morning. I looked at Porter and requested permission to run one final recon, just to mark the location of the first gate for when command authorized the actual operation. Porter studied me for a long moment. He understood exactly what I was planning. He said, "You have until 6 o'clock. After that, I report you AWOL and send a QRF to drag you back." Before we moved out, Farid pulled me aside and told me what Rahman had said privately. The song required a life. Someone had to remain at the gate after it was sealed, a keeper holding the door closed from inside. The last keeper before Rahman had been his great-grandfather. The man entered a gate in 1847. His body was found in 1923. He had not aged a single day. I should have stopped everything at that point, reported everything to Porter, and handed it to someone with more resources and more authority. I didn't, because every alternative meant leaving Reed and Miller and Price and Anderson wherever they were. I had failed them once by not going on that patrol. I was not going to fail them again. We moved out at 2200 on foot, 6 of us. Rahman set a pace that had no right to belong to a man his age, navigating mountain trails in near total darkness like he had walked them 10,000 times. Maybe he had. Part 8. The First Gate. We reached the summit at 3:20 hours. The first gate was massive, 20 feet high and carved with those same symbols, but far more elaborate. Centuries of addition layered over a foundation so old it felt like the mountain itself had grown around it rather than the other way around. The stone circle inside was large enough to hold 50 men, and standing in the center of it, in the darkness, were 4 figures: Reed, Miller, Price, Anderson. Eyes glowing faint blue in the dark. Facing outward, still as the stone around them. Rahman produced items from a leather pouch, a piece of dark stone, a curved knife, a scroll covered in writing I could not read. He told us to form a circle around the standing figures and not to break it under any circumstances. Do not stop chanting once we began. If the circle broke, he said, the gate would take all of us. I asked about bringing them back, whether the ritual could return them. But the expression on Rahman's face was the saddest thing I have seen on a human being. Perhaps, he said, if the song was strong enough, if the mountain was willing. But even if their bodies returned, their souls might be changed in ways that had no remedy. I said, teach us the song anyway. What followed is difficult to accurately describe because portions of it fall outside the vocabulary of anything I experienced before or after that night. We chanted, all 6 of us, Rahman leading, the rest following syllable by syllable. The temperature in that cave dropped until our breath came out as solid white clouds. The symbols carved into the walls began to pulse with light, slow at first, then faster, like a circuit powering on after centuries of darkness. The stone circle beneath the figures lit up, in threads of light connecting each symbol to the next. The figures began to scream, not human screaming. Dozens of voices compressed into 4 throats simultaneously, a chord of pure agony playing at a frequency that made my back teeth ache and my vision swim at the edges. Reed's body bent backward at an angle that should have shattered his spine. The others mirrored him exactly, puppets on invisible strings controlled by whatever was below. I forced the words out. Hayes beside me, face white but jaw set, matching the rhythm perfectly. Torres stumbled over a phrase and the temperature spiked violently. Frost melting to steam in seconds, the figures lurching forward half a step before Rahman's voice cut through the air like a physical force and drove them back. Then Reed's head turned and found me. Through the chorus, through the screaming. Through everything wrong about what he had become, one word broke through in his actual voice. the voice I had heard at morning briefings and evening chow and every ordinary moment in between. Hurts. I kept chanting. I had to. Stopping would have taken us all. The figures sank, slowly, as if the stone beneath them had become something other than stone, still reaching upward, still screaming. Reed's glowing eyes held mine until they disappeared beneath the surface of the rock and were gone. Rahman stepped into the circle, placed the bloodied stone at the center, pressed both palms flat against it, and spoke the final words alone. The light exploded, white, total, physical. When my vision returned, the figures were gone. Rahman was still kneeling. In the space of 30 seconds, he had aged 30 years. His hair had gone entirely white. His skin hung loose on a frame that seemed suddenly too small for it. But he was smiling. "First gate sealed," he said. He told us he could not leave. The keeper had to stay. That was always the price. That had always been the price. He asked us to tell his village he had kept his oath. We left him sitting in the center of that circle in the cold and the dark. Every step away from that cave felt like something tearing that would not heal. But we moved because he told us to, and because 16 gates remained, and because the dark moon would not wait. Part 9. The Race. Back at FOB Viper. Everything had changed. Black helicopters with no identification numbers sat on the landing zone. Personnel in civilian clothes moved with the efficiency of Tier 1 operators through what used to be our base. A woman in her 50s, Director Kleine, so no further affiliation offered, met us at the gate. Cold eyes. The specific kind of calm that comes from having made decisions other people couldn't live with. She walked me into a mobile command center, walled with satellite imagery and topographic maps, and told me the gates were artificial structures built by a prehistorical civilization that had been theorized for 18 months but never confirmed until now. She wanted signatures on non-disclosure agreements, told me my Marines were gone, and the sooner I accepted that, the more productive the conversation would be. I told her Rahman had given us a way to bring them back. She told me Rahman believed in fairy tales. Then the base alarm went off. At the north perimeter, 50 individuals were approaching on foot in perfect synchronization. No weapons visible. Not responding to warnings. And at the front of them, leading them with that tilted mechanical stride, was Corporal Marcus Reed. The crowd stopped 50 meters from the wire. Reed stepped forward alone. When he spoke, his voice carried across the distance with impossible clarity. "Return what you took. Give us the gates, or we take everyone." Kleine ordered her crews to open fire. The M240s cut loose, tracers crossing the morning air. Rounds tore through the crowd. The figures absorbed the impacts, bodies jerking with each hit, holes opening and sealing themselves within seconds. They kept walking. Grenades scattered pieces of them across the dirt. The pieces pulled themselves back together and kept moving. They reached the wire and began climbing. I watched the satellite feeds in the TOC and understood what they were doing. They weren't attacking randomly. They were positioning around specific structures, forming a circle using their own bodies. They were going to transform FOB Viper itself into a gate. Kleine ordered evacuation. I ordered my team in the opposite direction. 16 gates left. 4 hours until dark moon ended. The math was impossible. We ran it anyway. Part 10. 16 gates. We took a fast attack vehicle from the motor pool and started moving. Each gate took 15 to 20 minutes. Rahman's stone grew warm in my palm as the hours accumulated, absorbing something from each threshold we closed, growing heavier with what it had been asked to carry. By the 4th gate, Torres was bleeding from a head wound. By the 8th, Jackson was limping badly on a swollen ankle. Farid's voice was nearly gone from continuous chanting. Hayes was operating on something beyond what the body is supposed to be able to sustain. And I was hearing things at the edge of my perception, syllables in languages I had never studied, whispers from directions where nothing stood. The longer you spent near these thresholds, the more they reached back into you. We were running out of time in more ways than the clock could measure. At the 5th gate, Miller was waiting for us. Not the thing wearing Miller. Miller himself. I could see the difference the moment I looked in his eyes. There was pain there, awareness, Someone home behind the glow. He spoke in his own voice, not the chorus, just him, and told me they were too changed to come back the normal way. But there was another path. Someone had to go all the way through, past all the gates, to the source itself. Unseal it from the inside. The only solution that would hold permanently. Then he walked into the cave and the gate sealed around him. We kept moving. At the 15th gate, with 1 hour and 8 minutes left until dark moon ended and 2 gates still remaining, Ferid told me in a voice worn down to almost nothing what Rahman had whispered to him privately before we left the first cave. A failsafe. If the individual gates could not all be sealed in time, you went to the source directly. A temple at the peak of Mount Sikaram, built before Islam, before Buddhism, before Alexander came through this land and renamed it Bactria. The gates existed to contain what lived in that temple. Seal the temple and all remaining gates sealed with it. One person, alone, to the center of everything. I looked at my team, and 4 people who had followed me further than anyone should have been asked to go and who deserved to go home. I sent them north to the 16th gate and turned east toward the mountain. Part 11. The Summit. The climb was vertical in places, raw hands and burning lungs, and the sun going down behind the western peaks while I moved upward as fast as broken legs and sheer refusal could carry me. I reached the summit with 5 minutes left on the dark moon. The temple was not ruins. It was intact, carved directly from the mountain itself over a span of time I had no framework for. Massive stone columns, the same symbols covering every surface. A structure that had survived everything history had thrown at this particular piece of earth because whatever was inside it had kept it standing. And in the center, a pit. What black and absolutely bottomless, the source of every gate, every missing soldier, every story the local tribes had been warning each other about for 1,000 years. Standing at the edge of that pit was Marcus Reed. His eyes were human again, completely, entirely human. The glow was gone. For a few minutes in the last light of the dark moon, he was just Marcus, 23 years old, babyface, first in, last to complain. He told me calmly that someone had to stay. One of the ones who had already been through the gate, already changed, already partially part of what was below, could hold it closed from inside. A person who hadn't been through couldn't do it. The thing below would simply consume them without the anchor of someone already connected to it. But Reed and the others were connected. They could hold it. They would take turns. Say keep watch. He pulled 4 sets of dog tags from his pocket and pressed them into my hand. "Tell command we died in combat," he said. "Heroes, not whatever this is." The metal was cold against my palm. "Tell my mum I loved her. Tell her I died doing something that mattered." He said my call sign. "Hawk. Go. Before it's too late." I knelt at the edge of the pit, placed Rahman's stone on the ground, pressed my bleeding palm flat against it, and began the chant. My voice was raw and broken, and the words came anyway because the words had never been about the voice carrying them. The stone blazed brighter than anything I have seen before or since. The pit began to close, stone flowing like liquid, sealing itself from some deep internal logic. And Marcus Reed stood at the edge watching me with eyes that were entirely his own, entirely present, and until the last moment when the stone sealed completely and took him with it. The sun went below the horizon. The dark moon ended. Marcus Reed was gone. Part 12. What remained. I found Hayes, Torres, and Jackson at dawn, sitting outside the sealed 16th gate, pale, hollowed out, alive. "All of them?" I asked. "All of them," Hayes said. "Whatever you did at the top, it worked. They just stopped. All at once, like something cut their strings." We walked back together in the early light. The mountains were quiet. Just mountains. Whatever they had been holding for millennia was sealed again, and the valley below looked like a valley and nothing more. Command arrived within the hour. By the end of the week, we had our medals, our non-disclosure agreements, and our flights home. Director Kline personally handed me Reed's Silver Star. I took it without a word. Without a salute, I meant, without anything. The official record says FOB Viper, repelled a coordinated Taliban assault through effective defensive posture and close air support. Says 4 Marines from Reaper Squad were killed in action during a reconnaissance patrol. Says they died with honor in keeping with the finest traditions of the United States Marine Corps. All of that is technically true. None of it is accurate. Hayes builds houses in Colorado now. Jackson teaches high school history in Texas, which I've always thought carried its own quiet irony. Torres went to medical school. Fair disappeared? I've searched for him more times than I can count, and it's as if he never existed outside of those mountains. Me, I became a park ranger in Montana. Lots of mountains, lots of caves. I check everyone I find. After looking for symbols I hope to God I never see again. Some nights when the moon is dark and the wind moves through the pines in a particular way, I hear Reed's voice. Not the chorus. His actual voice, the one that said, "We'll be drinking warm, Rippets by 4 o'clock on the morning of October 14th. He says they're holding, says the world gets one more day, says they're okay. I believe him. I have to believe him. 4 dog tags in my desk drawer. Every morning, they're the first thing I see. Every morning I remember that the difference between a recorded sacrifice and an erased one is simply whether someone decides the truth is worth the cost of telling it. Marcus Reed, Jonathan Miller, Devon Price, Kyle Anderson, Reaper Squad. They never stopped being Marines. They just got assigned a post that nobody else could fill, or in a place that doesn't appear on any map, holding a door closed against something the rest of the world doesn't know exists. If this story stayed with you, if it found something real in you, then do 3 things right now. Subscribe, because there are more stories like this one that Command doesn't want told, and this channel is where they get told. Leave a comment below, tell me where you're watching from, and tell me what you think it actually takes to hold a door closed against the dark when nobody is watching and nobody will ever know. And share this video with someone who needs to understand that the most important battles in history are always the ones that never made the history books. We don't forget Reaper Squad. Not ever. And if Reed, Miller, Price, and Anderson can somehow hear any of this, wherever they are, whatever form that takes, you are not forgotten. You were never forgotten. You are the reason the rest of us got to come home. And I will carry those dog tags until the day I no longer can. Some doors should stay closed. Some Marines should never be forgotten. Some sacrifices are too great to ever fully repay. But we can start by remembering